Hi, welcome to MBAX 9152, the Week 8 introduction. The topic for this week is Governance of Digital Technologies. My name is David Goad. I am your course coordinator for this course, and this is an introduction to the content for the week. Agenda will be as previous sessions. I will talk about the review of the content for this week and the key concepts, and I'll talk about your to-dos for this week in terms of the upcoming Week 8. So there's several readings that we covered off this week, largely around how to set up governance in organizations. And really what it comes down to is a series of choices that organizations need to make in order to be successful in terms of governing their ongoing IT investments. What is interesting about the readings is, generally speaking, most of the readings will say to you that they don't make any specific prescription in terms of what style of governance will work for every organization. What they do say is that organizations that are very purposeful in terms of developing their governance strategies for their information systems are the ones that are more successful. So in other words, they don't necessarily say what strategy is the best one. They're simply saying if you have a strategy, then that's the best way about going about things. Now, in terms of governance, there are a number of different things that you need to think about that are covered off in the readings. The first one is they talk about the different types of governance. So there's structural governance. What is the enterprise's operating model? What are the aspects of the business that are controlled centrally? What are aspects are developed to local management? Whom reports to whom? These kinds of things. This is what we refer to as structural governance. Then there's what you refer to as financial governance. This is, for example, where the budgets reside, who controls the funding, what is the budgeting process, how do you get money approved for various information system or IT investments. Then there's what they refer to as performance governance, which is how are the employees evaluated, what are the metrics that you're holding your CIO and his IT organization accountable for, and how is their performance assessed. And then there's regulatory governance, not just in terms of financial regulations, but also health and safety, data privacy. There's lots of regulations, rules that need to be complied to, particularly in the information systems with relation to data management and privacy. The reading this week is what was called a matrix approach to designing IT governance was quite interesting. Basically, what that reading identified was that there was, in their view, sort of 5 key areas that you needed to develop governance around. These included things like IT principles, IT architecture, IT infrastructure strategies, business application needs, and IT investment and prioritization. So their view was that once you'd identified these sort of 5 key areas that you needed to look at, right, then there was a decision processes that you could use for each of these areas, and these decision processes could either fell into one of sort of 5 core types. This was either business monarchy, where the business makes all the decisions centrally, IT market monarchy, where the IT organization makes all the decisions centrally themselves, a federal system where there is a central control, but individual business groups are involved in the decision process, an IT duopoly, where at every level both IT and business get involved, and then a feudal system where basically all the different business divisions are making their own decisions themselves. And then they had sort of a 6th one, which they refer to as essentially anarchy, where there was no control. And then the idea or the view here was that depending on these types of decisions that need to be made and your decision process, you could develop a matrix that said that for certain types of decisions, certain types of processes would be followed. And basically, this was a way of sort of having a vision in terms of how an organization was making these decision making, how centralized it was, how decentralized it was, how much involved the IT department, how much involved the business, and how much they work together. And this was sort of a framework that you could actually evaluate existing businesses and then consciously make decisions about what would be more effective for your organization or your business in terms of a management strategy. Another view that I always like to talk about, which wasn't necessarily covered in the readings, but was indirectly covered in the readings because Gartner talks about this application portfolio management. And there's a reading that I'll talk about in a sec that we covered off that you guys were asked to do in Gartner. And in that reading, it talked about this idea of bimodal IT. And this is a concept that's been around for about, since 2015 that Gartner's been talking about this concept of that really, if you look at any kind of organization, there are 2 types of information technology or IS strategies that you can employ. The first one is there are applications that require what they refer to as a linear approach, or mode 1, where emphasizing predictability, accuracy, reliability, and stability is important. Mode 2 is more of a nonlinear approach that involves learning through iteration, emphasizing agility and speed, and above all, the ability to manage uncertainty. So the whole idea is that certain parts of your technology landscape would either be mode 1 and some other parts would be mode 2. So for example, ERP systems, CRM systems that are large, complex solutions, technologies that you don't change very often, maybe once every 10 years, they would likely be mode 1. But then, for example, customer service apps uses more modern technologies like artificial intelligence, IoT, and that might be mode 2 because it deserves a more sort of nonlinear or iterative approach. And so there was this idea that there was a view that the IT organization, there was two types of IT organizations. There was the mode 1, where you focus on reliability, price for performance. Linear waterfall was the most appropriate strategy in terms of project management, plan-driven, enterprise, suppliers. This type of mode was very good at conventional process and projects and technologies. And the cycle time for these could be in terms of months. Then there was mode 2, agility, revenue-based, iterative, Kanban, empirical, continuous process-based, small new vendors, incremental projects, short weekdays. And the whole idea here is that you should design your IT organization to be able to have both mode 1 and mode 2. There are some applications and some instances where governance requires sort of longer-term strategic management and other things that require sort of a more agile approach. And you should have your IT organization, your governance models be able to support both, and that you will get a mismatch if that you were trying to apply a mode 1 type of methodology and management style to a mode 2 technology or mode 2 problem. So this is another way that Gartner looks at how you can set up your. The other thing they talk about in the readings this week, actually there's a really good paper, Gartner paper, they talk about this pace layered application strategy. So I talked about bimodal a few minutes ago because this paper actually refers to this concept of bimodal. And then if you read the Gartner readings, they talk about combining bimodal with the pace layered application strategies. So this whole idea of pace layered application strategies talks about the concept that you have different layers of change or different layers of applications in the organization, and those layers are defined by the rate of change that you're going to experience. And so they talk about systems of record being sort of the foundational applications that don't get changed very often. Then you get these concepts of systems of differentiation, which are providing value added to the organization and competitive difference, and they change more frequently. And then they talk about this idea of systems of innovation. These are applications that change very frequently, and they're usually new ideas and they're experimental. And again, you can combine this idea of the pace layered application strategy with the bimodal IT approach, where some applications are sort of mode 1 and some applications are mode 2. And so they talk about the idea, they talk about how you would actually develop this application strategy. And obviously the first thing you want to do is engage the business. You want to look at the business capability model. So it's not about the technologies, it's about what you need to do. For example, servicing your customers, improving your supply chain. These are capabilities. And then you look at the technologies that are going to support these. And then you look at where those technologies are, systems of differentiation versus systems of innovation versus simply systems of record. You need to segment those business capabilities into certain categories. You need to create an application inventory that matches up with those categories. And then you need to think about how those applications are going to support the business in terms of those capabilities. And then assess the fitness and value of those applications. We talked about that in previous weeks where we went through that paper that talked about doing a health assessment of the various applications and using that as in terms of your strategy development. And then what you want to do is define and adapt the governance models to fit the application strategy or objectives for that particular area. And then you're looking at developing connective technologies to deal with the dynamics across all the different layers. So this is just so part of developing a governance model is having an application strategy. Part of having an application strategy is understanding your applications, and how important are they, and are they things that are going to be changing very frequently or less frequently? Are they mode 1 or are they mode 2? Or are these different layers in terms of the pace layered application approach? And then what you want to do is you want to, in terms of once you understand all this, you want to, and you develop the strategy, you want to regularly monitor it and update it. And so they have this whole idea that, you're going to have this continuous process where you're going to develop this application portfolio right? You're going to actually look at the different layers, think about where it falls into those various layers or those various modes of IT, and then you're going to develop, different strategies. And depending on the type of application and the layer it's in or the mode of IT, it may be a longer term, more waterfall classic approach, or maybe a shorter term, more agile approach. And you're going to develop roadmaps to support those different types of application strategies across the different capabilities of the one of the other readings that we talked about in terms of the textbook also talks about different instruments for governance. It talks this idea of you have structural instruments where you have organization charts and roles. You also have a horizontal instruments. These can include things like IT executive committees, steering groups, business process teams. This is where you're trying to get both the business and IT involved, and you're going to try and get multiple different stakeholders involved and then facilitate that communication. Other instruments for IT governance they talk about are functional instruments. So these might be processes, rules, procedures, and policies. And the text talks about two different types of policies: restraining policies and enabling policies. Restraining policies are trying to reduce risk by putting standards and guidance in terms of how much you can spend, how you do certain things. Enabling policies are really trying to give the business the opportunity to use technology as an enabler. So these are processes, for example, funding sources, the ability to use consultants. These are all things that enable business to be a little bit more agile and to use technology more as a strategic enabler. And then there's the other instruments that they talk about, which is a social integration and culture. I mentioned this to you guys last week when you were doing the discussion around enterprise architecture. In my view, a lot of the issue with regards to an effective governance model and effective enterprise architecture program is culture. Having a good EEA program where the culture is such that they see themselves as a support organization to the business and enabler, and they work closely with the business, is a much different and more effective methodology than having an EA or enterprise architecture group that sees themselves as the cops and the risk managers and people who say no all the time. It's the same in terms of your IT governance across the organization. Do you have an IT organization that's designed in such a way to enable people to make good decisions and to act quickly, or do you have an IT organization culturally that people see as being the group that always tells you no and that you can't do things? The book also talks about an organizing framework for strategic management of decisions. It talks about this idea that you have certain IT competencies that you need to think about, things like ability to develop strategy, to define the contribution of the information systems and your technology, what kind of capabilities you need, what kind of technologies do you need, how are you going to use these and put these into production through your different delivery options. And then how you're going to manage suppliers, your IT vendors ongoing. Most things these days are as a service model, so you have to be very, very tightly bound with your suppliers. How you're going to work with that. It also talks about the areas of incompetence where the main concerns that business always have about their IT function are things like lack of business strategy, lack of a focus on benefits delivery. I think in some cases this comes back to the business cases that IT organizations write up to justify these projects. And the fact that they're sort of trying to service the short-term nature that businesses always think. And then we talked about this in previous weeks, where the problem with having a good sort of IT or technology strategy or digital strategy is that oftentimes businesses will apply a very short-term focus. They will ask for things like return on investments of less than a year. And in a lot of cases, digital technologies don't have that kind of return on investment, or it's not clear. It's not specifically based on cost. And so you end up with IS organizations and IT organizations that write really, really, exorbitant business cases that were just not realistic. And then the business gets frustrated when they don't meet on those, on those commitments, and they don't see the benefits delivery that they were originally told. This idea of IT governance, IS or IT governance, and the challenges there are related to, being perceived as more as a traffic cop as opposed to enabler. Benefits planning, where are you going to focus application portfolio management, where are you going to get the most benefits out of your IT investment, and then really, is the IT or IS investment supporting business performance? And also this issue of information asset management, how you manage them ongoing, when you're going to do upgrades, these kinds of things, and the prioritize. So in terms of your to-dos this week, there are as follows. Obviously, you're going to have to go through the core readings. There was a couple of book chapters you needed to read, plus that Gartner paper, plus that other paper that they provided. You also need to complete the discussion topic. So you want to go back and revisit the Retail Co's enterprise architecture practices in light of your readings this week and what you learned. As I was trying to coach you guys last week in your discussions, I would encourage you to think about the cultural aspects of information systems governance and in enterprise architecture governance. I think at the end of the day, a lot of these, one of the key themes that comes out in all the readings is this idea of culture. And the idea that, in terms of to create an effective enterprise architecture group, you have to have a really good culture within the group, and there has to be a good culture and a good integration between that group and the rest of the organization. It's the same with information systems in general. You need to have a good culture within your IS organization, and that culture needs to be such that you see really good and healthy integration with the business, and they're working together. So I would encourage you to have a think about that as well. You are going to have to write your 8th blog post, which is around selecting and designing digital governance instruments and doing a little bit of analysis in terms of your organization and how, and apply some of the concepts from the readings this week around governance. You go and, of course, have to work on your group projects. Most of you have had or come back to me and asked for approvals on your various topics, and I've approved most of those topics now, so most of you are off and running in terms of group projects. But then the last thing you're going to have to do is this reflective presentation. And you guys are going to have to start thinking about that. I have started to see a few questions come through in the forums, and I will answer those questions. And I'll also give you some more guidance around that. But that's also something you should be thinking about, as well as how you're going to structure your reflective presentation. Anyways, if there's any questions, please post them up on Moodle or send me an email. And I hope you guys have a great week. Thanks.